Commissioner Maxim? Here. Commissioner Nero? Here. Commissioner Regoldman? Here. Commissioner Bowe? Here. Mayor Houser?
Okay, tonight we're gonna, this evening we're gonna relax.
Thank you guys all for coming. Last year we started doing these budget workshops, and I found it really helpful last year when the staff was doing their budgets, particularly when we were finalizing them, so that everybody had an idea of where we were going into preparing our budget. So I want to make sure that the same this year. There's a document that I will put up momentarily, but I'm also going to be kind of just taking some notes. The staff met a couple weeks ago to talk about their department needs as they were getting ready to turn in their first drafts of their budgets. Most everybody has turned theirs in. They're by no means anywhere near finalized. Tish and I still need to review them, and then we will also determine any changes that come out of this meeting and in a future meeting if we need to make those changes. So I think the first thing, I don't know if Maria, if you want to do an overview, if you want Tish to kind of give her overview first.
I think Tish should give it.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put, this is the document that everybody got earlier today. Yep, okay. Go ahead and hand it over to Tish.
So just working through fiscal year end for 2025, we still have about 2 months of state shared taxes to receive, and we review all invoices through the end of June or the liability date to record to fiscal year 2025 as necessary. So these are projections, always still remaining conservative on the revenue. And what I do know for expenditures that are incoming, and then some just kind of rough estimates on other monthly expenses. But we had looked potentially to have a deficit of 2.9 million. Looks like it's going to be right around $2 million deficit for the end of this fiscal year in the general fund. I've only worked at general fund year-end projections. So this will potentially eliminate the gains that we had received the past couple of years, taking the general fund back into a deficit fund. Talked with Maria and Rachel a little bit about this. Our state shared sales tax has remained flat. I generally budget with about a 3% increase. And, currently we are about 2% less than prior year. Just learned today that the local use tax has been changed effective January 1st, 2025. Local use tax is for items that are purchased outside of Illinois. Basically, online shopping used to be distributed per capita. Now it's distributed to the destination location. So only things purchased in Forest Park that are delivered to Forest Park will we receive this use tax for. That is a huge plus. So we generally get about $550,000 annually based upon the allocation that we received for current month of $7,000 compared to the $42,000 to $50,000 that we get. That's going to be about at least a $350,000 loss to the general fund. Now that could increase our sales tax, but it did not for the same period. So for the allocation that was just received, I believe it was January sales paid in February, taxes paid in February. There was no increase in the sales tax and a large decrease in the use tax. So that doesn't help. Yes.
When you said you learned today, was that the result of some kind of law change?
Yes. So it was effective January 1st, 2025. IML had kind of touched base a little bit on it, but both IML and Department of Revenue issued a publication but it came out on Friday. I just received it today. Because there were a lot of inquiries to the state about what happened to the usual funds. So that was a punch.
Do you, commissioners, do you get the IML? Okay, I was gonna forward it if you didn't.
Yeah. And then income tax, that is also distributed per capita. That actually has shown an increase, but it's not enough to, it basically kind of just evens out some of the decreases in the other state shared revenues. So just between most of the state shared revenues, the general fund is showing a deficit from prior year of about $175,000, less in allocation than what we received this time in fiscal 2024. So still 2 months worth of revenue to report on that. And then, that also has this impact on our non-home rule sales tax in our VIP fund. That's also about 2% less than prior year. A couple things about, well, let me go at least in order. So that's, property taxes. The village, increased the pension contributions annually from fiscal 2024 to fiscal 2025. The amount of property tax increase to the pension funds was just shy of $900,000. So that cash goes directly to the pension funds. That's not cash that the village can use. And so the village maintains about 25% of the cash flow that comes in from the property tax. And then license permits and fees, there were some large permits that were completed this year. And I think I mentioned that was like U-Haul and Aldi and Edsway. So there were some bigger projects completed in current fiscal year. And then all the other revenues, we know we're going to be not receiving some of the grants, or at least they've been on an indefinite pause. The tree canopy grant, which is through the U.S. Forest Service, the building code grant, which was through FEMA. There's discussions about whether or not we'll be able to retain the GEMT money, because that's Medicaid. So federal funding through that, and that's about $500,000 annually. Some big potential hits that the general fund will be seeing. And as Rachel knows, and as Maria knows, since a lot of the cash that comes in from the property tax is allocated to police and fire pension funds, I'm having to borrow cash from other funds to pay bills, pay payroll. So the general fund currently owes about $1.25 million to a TIF fund and to the VIP fund. So borrowing to make our payments. We never have good news. We've seen a few month remittances from the municipal cannabis tax, and it's really not anything to talk about. So I don't know, what the status of the other two locations will be, and if there will be any improvement there. We will be presenting soon a grocery tax ordinance, because the state has eliminated that from their budget in January 2026. So that's not going to be new revenue. That's just maintaining the revenue that we currently receive. And let's see what else. All the expenditures, every department has remained at or under budget. So that's consecutive year after year after year. It's just the fact that our revenues don't offset our expenditures, even with transfers in from other funds. Just don't have the available resources to offset the costs. A couple other things that I mentioned to Maria and Rachel earlier was our liability and our workers' comp insurance, and just how that has jumped significantly over the past 3 years. Current year is about $61,000 more than prior year, but all told, between 3-year comparison, it's $345,000. That's we've increased in premiums. All these are central, so it's not like any of this can be reduced or eliminated, yeah.
I would like to talk a little bit about the place of the meeting tax, because I know that's something we talked about last year, and it feels like, okay, a year later, and this hasn't happened. There's a couple reasons for that, the finance department is very busy. There were a lot of issues this year with personnel issues, and I think it's become really clear that there needs to be another person working there. So if it's someone full-time, if it's someone part-time, if it's a contractor that comes in and does the work. The contractors that the temporary people, right, that you work with from Lauderman, it was not a good fit. It didn't work out.
Yeah, it hasn't been ideal, so I do have them doing some work currently, but not as much as I would like to be able to hand off. I do have an inquiry into them. They told me that they helped set up another community to do the implementation. So I kind of want to get a feel for, how they've been implementing and tracking, and then what the hourly I anticipate it would cost if we're still using them to get the program rolling if we do go with them.
Yeah, because we were looking last year at we did a 1%, it would be $500,000 a year, and a 2%, $1 million a year. I feel like this should be a priority for Rachel, for you. I'm not, trying to tell you what to do, but this is the one and only source of revenue that we have available to us that's brand new and could be significant. And I think we need to move on this immediately. If I do my math, we're losing out on, over $1,300 a day just by not having this. And, I know that there's personnel issues. You don't have the time to do it, Tish. And so I think it's really clear that we need somebody to come in, and that just from what we would bring in alone could easily pay for even a full-time person to come in and help. So I don't know what the step is to make that happen. Obviously, we would have to, talk about it as a
Right.
council, but I think this should really be bumped up to the top of the priority list.
So, we would need consensus, what rate we want to impose. And then, ordinance, and then the allotted time for the businesses to implement it, because it's going to be I don't know if it'll be a cost for them in their software program, but it's going to be additional work for them. So we have to give, a period for them to report and remit.
And then, communicate in a way that lets the businesses understand why we're doing this. I understand that not all the businesses were super happy with the license, fee
Correct.
increases, and, that's fair. So, someone suggested to me, well, what if, part of this money that we bring in from the places of meeting tax, a small portion, we could allocate to the chamber for economic development or marketing, or, put some kind of small business loan in place, not the majority of the money, but if there's something we could do potentially to help the businesses feel better about it. But, at the end of the day, we can't ignore a source of revenue, probably only source of revenue that's available to us. And it isn't that I don't care about the businesses, it's that I care much more that we can pay our bills.
Yeah, we have a deficit. We're less than 40% funded for both pension funds. Anticipate the investments will have a loss as of April 30th. That's the reporting period for the police and fire investment funds. That gets rolled into the village's liability, so that loss becomes the back of the village. And we're not able to make our required contributions as it is. So I understand and I appreciate that. It's just hard for me to grasp anything besides those three immediate needs.
I know, and I'm not, coming down on you or
Yeah.
saying like you're a
Right.
terrible
No.
person. I just think you need
Yeah.
help, and you can't do everything by yourself, and we need to fix that for you.
Yeah, I've shared with Rachel and Maria, it's hard for me to wrap my head around adding some payroll when we're at a $2 million loss.
Do we know of any communities who have recently implemented the places of meeting tax?
I have a list of non-home communities that have had it in place for quite a while.
Oh, sorry.
No, go
Finish. I
ahead.
didn't mean.
Yeah, but that's, I haven't reviewed any of that since we talked about this last year, but I only reviewed non-home rule communities just for a better comparison.
And I remember, I think you shared that list last year. And it not really amounting to a huge increase on like an individual's, you know,
Right, on your bill.
bill.
Right.
But I would like to revisit that now because things have sort of changed in the last year. And as much as I was like, you know, much like Commissioner Maxey, I'm like, when are we gonna do this?
Right.
We need the revenue. Now the projections for not just the village, but for everybody at home, like looming recession, all of these things are kind of scary, and it makes me a little bit more nervous to introduce something like that right now, just because of how it could impact folks who already might not be going out as much anymore, and how that affects our businesses and our, you know, residents' pocketbooks. So it would be nice to look at those numbers again. I know I'd still be willing to go out and eat if it's just adding a couple of bucks. And if
Right.
that's really all it is, we can, I think, make that case
Yeah.
for the situation we have and,
Right.
and how this might help, but really bringing everybody to the table to sort of know that we're working together, trying to help our businesses and our residents, and not just throw something hefty on them.
Well, it would be a couple bucks. I mean, if you go out for dinner.
That's
it's
what I remember
$100,
a
it's
year ago.
$2.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just know even
2%.
prices at restaurants have gone up in the last
And if
year.
you're going out to eat, spending $100 on dinner, you probably don't care about $2.
Right, and like a, you know, quick meal at McDonald's, I think it was like 75 cents. But I just think we'll need to really
Right.
be able to show those figures.
I think one of the things too, so one of the groups that I'm in with ILCMA, we have a web board, and places of eating tax have come up. So I know when Vanessa first brought it to my attention a couple of years ago, I was like, I don't want to have to pay that. And she looked at me and she said, how often do you eat North Riverside? And I went, she's like, they have a places of eating tax. So I think too, if we can, you know, take a look at who around us is potentially implementing it as well, and maybe that'll give us a little bit more justification as to, are we the only one not doing it? I mean,
Yeah.
not to be that person, but just, you know, if that's what if we're holding back on that reason, but everybody else around us is doing it, it may be a little bit more motivation to feel comfortable moving forward with it, so.
I agree. I think we should talk about those things, but for me, the biggest justification is we can't pay our bills and fund our pensions. We can't, you know, we, yes, should look about how it's gonna impact, you know, residents, but at the same time, like, how can we not? So, you know, that's sort of how I feel right now. So what would the next steps be to?
So I think the biggest thing is gonna be, I know Tish and I need to sit down and figure out how much in totality a part-time person would be, and what kind of job description that would look like if this is a 10-hour-a-week job versus a 20-hour-a-week job. Like that would be a difference there. You know, are there other things that Tish could use help with, versus if we had, say, Lauterbach do it for us. And so I think once we get those two pieces of information, we can figure out in the cost of a year, how much would it cost us to have an outside agency do it for us versus an inside person? Are we going to get more bang for our buck with an inside person versus, you know, a consulting firm, versus how much we anticipate potentially bringing?
Do what? What is the burden? What is the?
So
additional
it's
burden?
on the village to actually collect the tax, whereas the other taxes go through the state and then they just, you know, cut us a check. Places of eating tax comes all through
Right.
us.
So we'd have to follow up. So the option is provided to the business that they can pay this tax, how they pay their other taxes. So if they pay monthly, they have to pay us monthly. If they pay quarterly, et cetera, if they pay annually. So we have to be following up and imposing late fees because the business was, you know, a month or 2 months late. It's a system.
So, I mean, if it's something that you want us to make a priority for this coming year, we can definitely, you know, put that at the top of our list. But just know that it's not gonna be an immediate thing that goes into place, as far as, you know, if there's consensus and then we pass an ordinance, we still have to figure out internally how we're going to go ahead. Handle all of it.
So you mentioned the number, like $1,500 a day. Where does that come from?
if we were making $500,000 a year, if we implemented a 1% tax, that breaks down to roughly, $48,000 a month, that we're not getting.
500,000
And that's
just
a-
from
and
the
that's
places
a-
of meeting.
Yeah, and if it was $1 million, it would be double that. That would be bringing $1 million annually, which is not unrealistic according to last year. So
It's
again,
at the
if
two
there's-
percent rate, right?
Right.
yeah,
That's
that's at
2%,
2%. That would be at 2%, and so, yes, the economy has changed. Maybe people aren't going out as much, but it's still gonna be, between, at 2%, if we did that, would be between probably 500 and a million annually.
And that's based on the projections that we saw, based
Correct.
on the area.
Correct.
It's based on, so I am able to view the sales tax remittance from what, from the state, so it's based off of that.
Right.
But I do have the comparables of what the other communities that we reviewed last year have received.
Yes.
At the moment, no.
So kind of moving on to the next thing, I always think it's really important that the department heads share kind of what is coming up in their year that is outside of the normal, things that they need. So staff did that a couple weeks ago, and I just wanted to give the department heads an opportunity to talk about what their needs are gonna be so that you have a full picture as to what is coming down the pipeline. So if anybody wants to start, I'll pull up my notes from. These are what. Yours was an easy one. You want to start?
Yeah, we don't have any new expenditures that we need. We don't need any equipment or anything like that. We're actually looking, something's on the agenda tonight for, water billing. We're gonna outsource the printing and mailing of it, but it'll be on postcards instead of letters. So we'll save money, like $6,000 a year.
I will say the clerk's office is one of the few places in the village that we can actually look at not only cost savings, but ways to increase. So, Vanessa and Tish this year we looked at the license and fees. What did we come up with? That was an additional
It was like
90 some
$90,000.
$1,000s by increasing the business license fees. Last year, we were able to bring in some new revenue when we increased the liquor license fees. And some of that also, we take into account that, those business license fees were increased because salaries have increased as well and the needs have increased. And so in the last 17 years, the price of the business license wasn't keeping up with the cost that we had internally. So, that was good. On tonight's agenda, you'll see that we are looking at a new service to save on how we do our water billing. And so that was going to be a little bit of an added savings. But
We don't have vehicles or anything that we have to replace. We
Yeah.
just got a new folding and stuffing machine.
yes, and they're using that to its fullest potential. So, so out of the clerk's office, I think we're kind of good. Karen could not make it tonight. She's a little bit under the weather. So kind of just going off of what she had talked about at our budget meeting. Vehicles, their buses, she said their bus is in rough shape, but they can make it another year. So just something that we'll want to keep in consideration for fiscal year 2027. The DCFS money, one of the things that the community center is able to do because they are licensed through DCFS is they do get some money through them. And so we're keeping an eye on those funds. If it goes down the same route that some of the other funds have gone, that might not be something that, we can get down the road. And typically that is given through the families, but then they utilize it to pay for childcare services. Sal, you want to go next?
Sure. Basically in my general budget, because of the costs and everything, it's keeping everything pretty much status quo, cutting where I can, just kind of increasing things where I need to with inflation as far as water sampling costs and just cost of goods that we've looked at a few things as far as trying to use TIF money to upgrade my building. unfortunately, my family's not in the tenth district. But we've been trying to juggle things and see what we can do, some ideas. Big money stuff that I do need, that I am asking for this year, which I asked for last year, and unfortunately didn't work out too well, is forestry equipment. I do need a bucket truck and a chipper truck badly. They're in rough shape, and forestry is one of our biggest services that we offer, so I'm hoping that I can get that done. As far as anything that I can bring in as far as revenue, our water meter project is up and running, and that will be bringing in some revenue once the water meters are in place. That's minimal stuff that I'm asking for. A weather application, subscription one that every other community actually uses. It gives us pinpoint weather for big storms as far as summertime storms and for winter storms.
Can I go back to, I just, since this is also being recorded and zoomed, when Sal mentioned, you know, revenue as far as the water meters, we're not looking to make new revenue off of residents. We're looking to, we subsidize a lot of water because we're not capturing all the usage. And so the water meters are gonna help residents hopefully be able to control the amount of water that they're using, and also be able to have the village be able to bill accurately. And so, you know, with the newer meters, it's gonna capture more accurately the amount of water. So the village won't be necessarily subsidizing as much of it because it's not being captured through the meter.
And we are also going to be bringing forth recommendations for 10, 12, or 15-year plan to have the meters be billed to the users, the actual cost of the meters. As the project overall is about 4 million, give or take. So we're going to try to recoup some of that cost. So that will be coming the next, hopefully next month, for council review.
Along with our department, the cost of doing business, so there's overhead with any business. I do have some upgrades that need to be done in some of our water pump stations as far as pumps, communications with our SCADA system and so on and so forth. That's in our budget. But other than that, like I said, overall, I'm keeping everything the way it is with some minor increases for inflation, and then I'm cutting where I can. So nothing major besides my trucks.
So, what happens if we didn't do forestry? Would you need the current staff? I mean, let's get into it, right? I mean, if you have a current staff that does forestry, if we didn't have the vehicles and we didn't have the depreciation of vehicles and we didn't have to pay for the staff and everything that goes along with that, does it make sense if you outsource that?
As it is now.
I mean, I don't know if you can answer that now, but
I
it's.
mean, I can answer some of it. As it is now, I mean, obviously, as far as staff's concerned, I can use them anywhere else, and there's just things to do. Trucks and so on, it was saved there, but as it is now, outsourcing, what I do as far as the big trees that I can't reach, I budget 50,000 for that, and I'm budgeting a little bit over 50,000 for our pruning program. So you're probably gonna at least double that.
But Commissioner, are you asking though, when you say outsourcing forestry, would that be eliminating staff in order to meet that savings? As
Yeah.
opposed to like the way that Sal mentioned it, where he would find other things for them to do, but we would still
Yeah,
have that.
that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that we can't continue to do what we're always doing here if, you know, so I mean, yes, you'd have to cut staff. You would not purchase, you know, anywhere from $235,000 to $300,000 worth of new equipment. And, you know, you would have to worry about that, you know, but would it offset the $100 grand a year? How many people is that on your staff? 3, 4 people? I don't know.
And I would say that he wouldn't
Any with
start
benefits and
using
pension
them
and all that stuff?
on other things. He already does.
I already do.
Sal, how many people are in forestry, like on that assignment?
3 people.
3 people.
Yes, minimum.
But they're not full-time forestry. They're obviously
They
doing
do
other
other
things
things,
throughout
yes,
the day.
absolutely. But I mean, as far as, you're talking, shooting beans on a daily, I get tree trim requests 2, 3 at a time.
Mhm.
I mean, I have, through my Esri GIS program, I have a thing called Workforce where I put all those work orders in.
Mhm.
See them firsthand. We're lined up for weeks and months.
Sal, you do a great job. Everyone tells you every other week, you know, and you do a fantastic job with the staff that you got and what you do. I think
I'm saying them for doing a
tough
good job.
discussions here, right, is like, how do we do more with less, right? That's the whole deal.
No, right, I mean,
You know, and so going out and spending $500,000 on new equipment, it just seems like an opportunity where if we were to kind of lift up the rugs, you know, there might be opportunity there. I don't know. I mean, you just happen to be first through the chute here.
Well, and I would also bring up, I don't know how much things have regulated on the used market, and I know, you know, George's feelings about that and stuff you've said about that, but we could certainly find, I would imagine, some used options that might come in at last that are going to buy us some time, that are better than what we're working with right now. So I don't know if we can start exploring that a little bit more.
So I will say that we have a resident employee who is actually very good at looking for equipment, and we have not found anything yet that has,
he's constantly scouring
Yeah.
yeah.
I know we looked at some like 2 years ago when we were talking about this, but it's been a while.
Yeah, and so we've got access to a couple of the government, particularly government used vehicles that people are putting up, whether they're free and you just pay for shipping and handling, or they are on, you know, for sale, used. So we'll continue to keep doing that and cross our fingers that maybe something will come up. I will say he's not in sales department, so it's not something that he's necessarily doing all the time, but he does know that we are looking for something.
And not so much the chipper truck, but the bucket truck is a very high demand piece of equipment.
Yeah.
So buying one used is a little bit less than new, but it's right up there. It's very expensive for one.
We tried to go the free route with that actually, and it ended up not being a usable option for us, so.
Which I think is also on the.
It's on the disposal,
today.
yes, it's under the disposal ordinance tonight, so.
I was gonna say, I appreciate your question, right? I think we have to ask really hard questions, and even if, you know, I'm not suggesting, you know, that that's what we do, but I think these are things that we're gonna have to talk about. Thank you. Being very honest.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so Rachel and I talked about this, and at least for fiscal 2026, we're gonna move some of sales expenses that are normally under public property to the VIP fund, and it's gonna be for the parkway maintenance and for all the building maintenance. We kind of can justify that is truly infrastructure. So we are at least going to reallocate those out of the general fund and move it into VIP. And I did talk with Rachel just briefly today, you know, as the year goes, you know, we have a couple infrastructure projects we're committed to. We're still paying debt out of this fund also, but we can start looking at other general fund expenses that potentially could be reallocated to the VIP fund. I don't see why the tree wouldn't be one of them. So just some of that. Keep in mind, we're trying to be creative with our resources.
You're thinking of doing that for 2026?
We're gonna do that. We're gonna do, yes, so parkway improvements and all of the building maintenance is gonna be moved to VIP fund.
Anything else? Let's do our next sheet.
So when, day we met 2 or 3 weeks back, this department had, I think it was actually 5 active squads. So our fleet of 10 squad cars were down. We have 5 officers on the street at one time. So if there was someone that wanted to sign up for an overtime detail that we have, we get funding through the CTA and through the Illinois Department of Transportation. We were actually turning people away. And I'm wrong, we did have 6 squad cars. So we would have someone coming in to work CTA and to work IDOT, and we had to turn one of the 2 away. That was fixed, and our full fleet is back except for 1 car. Cars are important to us and what we do to do our day-to-day business. council's always been good with me about getting cars. This year, I'm gonna be asking for 3 like I did last year. One's gonna come out of our vehicle replacement fund, and that'll be a Mark Squad car, and we're gonna do the upfitting for 2 cars out of that. And then the police department has a seizure fund and a customs fund. We have an officer that is assigned to a federal agency, and we get seizure money, and that trickles in as the court cases go by. It's we have money there. There's limited use. We're limited in what we could do 1505 seizure money for and customs money for. So we have to toe a line and make sure we're following the guidelines. But we will be getting, or at least asking for 1 squad and 1 CID vehicle, which is our criminal investigations division. They haven't gotten a new vehicle in criminal investigations since I think 2007 or 2008, when we got 2 Dodge Chargers that were new. Those actually just went out of service. The last one went out of service about 2 or 3 years ago, and I was using that as a take-home car at the time when I was deputy chief and when I was acting chief. So cars are our biggest expenses. Laptops were already taken care of. We have a DUI fund. We were able to use that money to get laptops this year. At one time, the department got, I think it was 17 laptops on a grant. We got them all at one time. Well, they all become antiquated at the same time. So now we're trying to do it, put a system in play that every time we get a squad car, I have a laptop as a cost of the upfitting. So we're constantly cycling out our old equipment when we can. So we don't get to the point like we are now where we need to replace all 17. Put laptops, so put the laptops in. Well, we're looking into a drone program. The money for the drone and training would come out of the customs fund. I believe that covers it. That's the line item we used. Training at least 3 officers. They have to go to training. It's like an FAA license. And we would use that at the softball tournament parade, 4th of July. And then there's legalities to it. We have a log of everything we do posted on our websites. Staffing has been my constant, basically nightmare. If anything here gives me stomach aches, it's this. Overtime is going to be bad again this year. We'll try to, I'll be working on the street again to try to help out, which doesn't thrill me, but it's part of what I have to do. The deputy chief will be working on the street, and our 2, our administrative lieutenant, patrol lieutenant will be working on the street. I'm getting to the point where I even pull the detective sergeant out like once a week just to try to cut overtime. Right now, we are swearing 2 people in tomorrow. We're going to be at 35 out of 38. So of those 35, 2 will be going into the police academy. I have 1 person in the police academy. I have 2 people in field training. That's 5 bodies that are not usable. So they're being paid, but they're not in a squad car working a beat. And unfortunately, last week, within a 7-day period, I had 3 officers injured, 2 off duty, 1 on duty. So there's some unexpected there. So now I'm working with a skeleton crew, which is why I'm going to have to start jumping in and at least keeping burnout away. But it's not something that's going to end anytime soon. We're planning on sending 3 people to the police academy in August, September. And so they won't graduate till December, and then it takes about 4 months to get them prepped if they make it. We've been running into troubles with people making it through our FEO program. My last 6 hires, not including the guy in the academy and the 2 being sworn in, out of the last 6, I have 2. So
Is that typical?
my failure rate's been about 50%.
I will say it's been an issue since at least 2015 when I was on the council. We had the same issue. It was like we would hire 4 and then we would lose 2 or 3. So I mean, that's 10 years ago. So it's kind of like constant cycle. And I will give the chief and the police department credit. They have been looking at their FTO program to see if there are some changes that they can make within their FTO program. They've recognized that, the young adults coming into our program, they learn differently than perhaps the officers that are on the street right now. And so they've been taking a look at how they can change things up to see if there are ways to help our candidates go through the program. But sometimes we just get candidates that unfortunately aren't meeting the standards. And So, you know, we don't want to compromise our standards, especially in the police department, but, you know, they are looking at different ways to see if we can do that. And then along the lines of the vehicle replacements, the chief and I actually met with a company the other day. We're trying to see if there are other ways that we can put together a different type of vehicle replacement fund. So there are municipalities that actually lease their squad cars. So that's one thing we're looking at. We don't know if it'll be better for the village, but we did sit down with them and they're putting together a proposal for us. Police department, and Sally, I need to get some public works stuff information from you as well, just to see if that is something that we can, you know, after 3 years, we can get new vehicles instead of hanging on to them, you know, for 10 years, and actually get some equity out of them and have a lower payment as well. So we're trying.
And with that, we met with the sales rep last week, and at least at first glance, it looks like a good deal, but she's a sales rep, and that's her job, is to make it look good. We're gonna meet with her again in 3 weeks. 2 weeks. She's got some information from the police department. We'll see if it's financially wise to do. So time will tell with that. So
With respect to the lease plan?
to lease it instead of buying it, the program that we're looking at, it's a village wide. I mean, it can be customized to just police department or just public works or just administrative, but I'm gonna talk to 2 other departments that I know that utilize this, and it's 2 chiefs that I know well. See what they think of it, how long they've been using it, and if there is a cost savings, and what the problems are too, what the negatives are. And then it says the bucket truck on there, so it's one that's on the agenda for tonight. I've been thinning out our fleet. We do have some antiquated cars in there that aren't used. There's a car that's also on the agenda tonight that the past 3 years, they put 0 mileage on it. I'm not keeping cars that are being used, so some people will be unhappy with me, but that's part of my job. So we'll add some money back by sales back into the fund. And that's pretty much it.
What about fooding? Wasn't this something? we talked about?
You guys want to start? I got people chomping at the bit.
Just interested in what we would be looking at in terms of,
There are there's a lot of outstanding parking ticket revenue. And I know I've mentioned this in the past. In the past, the state of Illinois allowed municipalities to suspend someone's driver's license if they owed X amount in parking ticket fines. The state of Illinois changed that rule. The only thing that they'll suspend a license for is toll evasion. So they get their money. The state of Illinois gets their money, but municipalities don't. And so we don't have that as an avenue to collect. We do something, it's called, I always forget, drip or drop.
I drove.
I drop.
Yeah.
So through this state of Illinois, if someone's in collections and let's say they have some outstanding parking tickets and they either get a Illinois state tax refund or get a lottery winning where they have to file a claim, they'll take the money out and send it to us. So we do give money that way. Collections, we do have a collections agency, but that's hit or miss. So voting would be another avenue for us to recoup some of the losses from the parking tickets that we write in overnight parking or just general day-to-day parking.
One of the things too we can look at is, you know, we can do a limited time amnesty program where people who haven't paid their parking tickets yet, like we can put together a program where, you know, we limit the fees, we, you know, would possibly go back to like the original if they pay within a certain amount of time. Once they get to collections, we can't do anything with that. So, I mean, that is, we can continue to look at things like that, so that we get violators who have parking tickets coming in to pay their parking tickets, but maybe they didn't pay it originally and now it's, you know, there's been a fine put on it, and so they're just not paying. But again, we lose the ability to make those deals once they get to collection.
and I'm not necessarily saying we should, I just know very little about it.
Yeah, it's we stopped during COVID because people were hard times.
Yeah.
And I know our parking enforcement officers would do it. If we brought it back, or the program initially, like roll out with an amnesty program and say, hey, we're just start going out and booting on this date. It might get us a little, we'll recoup some.
What's the time frame from when a ticket's issued to when it goes to collections?
I want to say it's about,
Oh, okay.
because you have that initial court hearing, there's a secondary court hearing, and I think you get a third. But don't,
Yeah,
mark
okay.
that as gospel.
When would someone be booted?
It's after. There's a.
If you don't know, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I have to look up the ordinance. I know there's that there's a minimum dollar amount. Once they, technically, once they're in collections,
What's the net gain of going that route?
I'd have to look at the numbers. Last year was, the number of outstanding citations was pretty high, but not everyone lives in town. So let's say someone had a stack of tickets because they were visiting their boyfriend, girlfriend, and they live in the city, and now they're no longer with their boyfriend, girlfriend. They might not be here, and they might not be recouping that money. People that are regularly here. So I mean, that'd be a variable that you'd have to consider. So if I gave you a dollar amount and said, hey, there's 2 million outstanding, I'd be lying to you saying that we're gonna get 2 million back. It'd probably be a lot less.
Yeah.
And people won't, I mean, people really don't like it. When you get your car immobilized, you're not a happy camper.
No. Yeah, is there a safety concern for your, is that parking enforcement that's doing that?
Enforcement, but often when they would do them in the past, they would have an officer stand by with
Okay.
or some, like when Officer Lane did it, he was an auxiliary officer, and so he had police training his arm, so.
But then there's also the negative reputation, you know, that
Yeah.
comes with that, like, oh, darn cops, you know, we're building my car. So,
Yeah, there's definitely a negative impact too, or negative image.
And I will say too, as far as our PEOs, we have 2 full-time and then we are, right?
We're supposed to have 4 part-time parking enforcement officers that with the duty of enforcing our night park ordinance. They start at 12 a.m. or until 6 a.m. Right now I have 1, and at most, I want to say I've had 3 since I've been chief in November 2021. It's a lower paying job. I think the starting pay is like $17.84. It's not desirable hours. It's 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. And you work 4 days on, 4 days off. So you're rotating, you're working not only overnight, but some weekends. When we do have 4 people, we could enforce throughout the town. If I only have 1 person working 4 days, there's nights when it's not being done. Our officers will jump in and start doing it sometimes. But a lot of times too, they're patrolling alleys and making sure your house isn't getting broken, garage isn't getting broken into, or your car.
Yeah, and we have 1 PEO right now who he's doing other duties because we also need to have our cameras, our body cams, our station cameras. They need to be attended to. So Chief and I are trying to work out something so that we can free up that extra PEO spot and hopefully then have 3 full-time PEOs and limit the number of part-time so that we can have a better schedule going on there. So we're working on we're still working on getting there.
So the airpacks, we submitted for a grant again this year. It's a assistance to firefighters grant for FEMA. Chief Geppetta submitted for that the last few years. They did it this year. Without that grant, the purchase of the airpacks would be $75,000. So
They're at the end of their life. basically,
they
right?
are, so they're not NFPA compliant, and then we've had 2 failures, so those 2 factors maybe give us a edge up on the grants. But, those incidents of the air pack failures at structure fires that limited our ability to respond and have a safe, effective crew. That was put into our narrative, and supposedly they take that into account, so.
So when you I'm sorry. Where do you think you're at with the grant? When do we know?
By the end of the year, so the fall, and we wouldn't purchase anything, so that.
So you guys respond to fires to all the surrounding communities, right? Is there any assistance that they can provide if you approach them? Out of the box, as maybe that sounds, you know?
Right, no, there's the mutual aid system, so like, we don't get assistance for that. But I financial assistance to them when they're quit. That kind of all this. Well, they help us in other ways. So, if we do get the grant, then it would be $18,000. The overtime, that's not a different amount this year. It's just that it looks different because we accounted for things. So, average the amount of sick time. So it was normally like $160,000 budget year, but we would go over. So this time I just tried to like average it and like, really do a better job estimating that. The technology changes we had. So I know it was approved on the last agenda, but updated to First Due programming. So that'll consolidate our scheduling and our report management programs. So, but this first year, it's $27,000, and then each additional year will be $19,000. But the difference between what we were paying in the old software to this current one will be at $10,000 per year. But that does get us access to things that we didn't have in the past. So, ability to access information about a property when we pull up and things like that. New ambulance this year, hopefully coming. It's been 4 years in the making. Waiting on that, and that's kind of like an industry thing right now, especially with the group that we bought it from. So hopefully we're looking at August delivery for that, and then that's on the agenda. Our switching on in today, state increase, and then with that, there's the stretcher cost, and we're looking to apply for grants for that. Cover that cost. The firehouse maintenance, that budget went up for us just because it used to be a $3,000 line item, and the last 2 years we've had like $10,000 or more worth of things break. So we just want to, have a number of what to anticipate with the firehouse. It's aging, so. Okay, so that's kind of like this year stuff. Looking beyond, like personnel. So we've budgeted in the past for a second deputy or like a lieutenant, but just, in 24, we lost a captain, a second or a fourth lieutenant, and an administrative staff member. We never got those back. And now with all the increase of service calls, we don't really have the capability to do as far as like meeting those needs. So we haven't been getting inspections done. That's the bottom line, but definitely open to try to figure that out to put on that position. And then the other thing is, so this is the kind of the big thing right now is this increase in service. So in 2002, we were running like 2,475 calls, and then 2024, 4,491 calls, and again, lost staff, there's been no additional personnel to respond to these demands. We've been trying to do things at the shift level to try to lessen the burden on the guys. Clearly they're more exhausted. They're going on more calls. They're up all night. That leads into injuries and illnesses. So we have to kind of start thinking about a second ambulance or a way to cut the volume. And I know we can't afford this second ambulance with personnel. So if we could get this call volume down, and I know this is a tough thing, but we really need help.
What percentage of that call volume is CTA?
Okay, so last year it was about 500 calls to 7-Eleven displays. Out of 500. This year, we're projected to do over 46,000 calls, which is freaking me out a little bit. And then about 600 of those are to the CTA, the 7-Eleven property alone. So we just, when's it gonna stop? It's, a couple years away from being 1,000 calls.
Yeah, so I did talk with Chief Hankins today. I did get a message from our government liaison from CTA. I think I forwarded it to the commissioners and the mayor today. There is some legislation moving forward to look at overdose prevention sites, and the CTA is supporting that. My guess is that in hopes that some of their locations would also become part of the study group for overdose prevention sites. So, something along the lines of that. Potentially, I don't know if there's anything the county would be willing to do. We have a county building at the end of our blue line. They don't do anything drug service wise, I believe, at that building. So those, I think, are ways that won't necessarily impact us right away budget wise, but when we're talking to our legislators, those are conversations that we have with other entities that we also deal with, because I don't know, we need help cutting those. There's not much that within our own capacity we can do to reduce these calls to the CTA. We need help from bigger organizations in regards to the calls that we have at CTA. And I think we talk a lot about the overdose prevention services, because those are the type of calls that we're dealing with at both of the blue line and the green line.
That's the majority.
So I would say that and behavioral health. So
We communicate that state officials as part of the hearing on transit reform. There's a bill, like everyone knows, to merge the transit agencies. And both the chiefs wrote letters to Senate staff articulating the increased level of response required from 2 CTA lines that end in Fort Park, particularly 7-Eleven displays. It's not going to be a short-term fix. The only promising thing is that the Senate, followed up and asked us for additional information. Chief Hankins did update her numbers. In a formal hearing, when we presented the increases that she just articulated, senators were truly jaws dropped. Repeat what you just said. So, they recognize that there's one burden on a town of 14,400 individuals, making that number of runs to 7-Eleven. So we'll continue to articulate that to the state. When the commissioners were there last week, we gave them that information. So the Lifers are there. And as part of any really significant transit reform, one of the proposals is to have a sort of in-house presence on the train lines that would monitor things like unhoused riders and try to get in terms of the rest of the help.
The other thing I could just add, additional conversation that's happened about the transit reform is in order to move, there's a lot of discussion, but one of the, you were saying, Mayor Hoskins, one of the things that they want is to move, they have to move the bill out of committee. They said they have certain criteria. And in my work with Housing Forward, Housing Forward is working with legislators as well to provide the folks that are in the committee that are looking at transit reform, because they are concerned and to sort of how folks that are working with unhoused people are providing services to folks that use the CTA for a housing option, who are unhoused or may have behavioral health issues, and trying to come at this from another way. So there are a lot of people coming around this issue trying to say, what resources are available? How can we all come at this to make sure that there can be transit reform, but also deal with many issues and many needs that transit riders have, and to address the concerns that communities are raising in addition to the issues that we did in Forest Park.
So that, and then this is like a document of kind of, a graph I'm kind of working on, but these are the other firehouses in our other fire ones in our division. And I split up their call volume by how many firehouses they have. So like Cicero, and I don't have complete information, but Cicero runs a decent amount of calls, and you split it up by firehouse. We're still big above. So just like what we're up against here. And then the last thing was the vehicles. So this is something, you know, I know we've talked about the truck not fitting in the station. But I did talk to some engineers from Pierce this week. So they're gonna come out and kind of evaluate our firehouse and see if they can get the Pierce thing out stock truck in our firehouse and see if it'll work. The stock truck is $2.5 million. And then if you just, you know, don't make it custom, which hopefully we won't need to, that'll be a year wait, which in 2028, our current truck will be 25 years old. And then the engine, due to be replaced in 2027, that's about $1 million. And the same thing, I'm looking at the stock options on these vehicles to, you know, make the wait time a lot less. So it'd be 1 year compared to 4 years. And then if we did have to do a custom thing where it's 4 years, we again go beyond the replacement year, but then run into the problem like we do with the ambulance where the price changed.
And we're still working on the firehouse rehab. You know, we've got that going on so that we can, you know, do what we need to do and be able to put in the proper application for the 1.5 million that's been allocated for Forest Park. What we're running in with that is that, you know, that was allocated several years ago, and we weren't able to do anything with it until all of a sudden then this money was allocated, and they're like, okay, here, fill out this information. And we didn't have any of the prep work done because we didn't know where we stood with it. So we're still trying to, we're kind of playing catch up on that, but that is still on our radar. And I believe the architect was out last week, so we should have that. So we're working on the existing structures report so that then we can move to the next portion of it, which will be to give us a actual budget for the needs that we would have in the fire department. One of them being able to potentially create a bigger space for us to get a stock engine in that we can't do right now, so that we can get that grant application in for that.
Because of, besides the bread and butter needs of the department, which there's no ask there. Much of what we do is teed up a year in advance, and we've got a number of open initiatives that still require council action. And that is probably going to be the greatest predictor of what my needs are going to be next year. So I'm not even going to speculate on needs above and beyond the bread and butter at this point.
Talked a little bit about, I mean, obviously Tish gave her report. So a couple of things that, you know, I will say, staff continues to look for grants. I know that's been a recurring theme the last couple of years, and there's definitely value in it. But I will also say, Tish and I are sometimes pulling our hair out when it comes to grants because there's a lot of work involved in it. You know, the fire department may apply for a grant, but it's, you know, typically they need financial information, which means then we're adding something else to, you know, to Tish's plate. You know, the time frame in which some of these bigger grants come into play, or even some of the smaller ones, you know, we're still trying to work out. I did have a talk with legal as far as ensuring which grants needed to come in front of the council versus which ones we can go ahead and do, particularly on our own staff wise, because of the time frame that is typically involved. A lot of times we'll find out about them and it's like, okay, you have you know, by the time we find out about it, it's like maybe a week and a half sometimes, and there's not enough time to turn it around. So they've given me some direction on that, and so obviously the ones that need council approval will continue to come to council for. I definitely want to stress that, you know, as I think every department in here is doing more with less. You know, they may not have the staff on the books in the case of particularly the fire department, you know, where they had more personnel several years ago. But in the Vanessa's department, I think there is one position that could be filled that we just haven't. We've got, you know, public health and safety, there is a part-time person in there that we just haven't filled, you know, due to trying to keep our costs down. Sal, technically, the assistant to public works didn't necessarily come entirely out of his budget, but he's operating without an assistant that the previous director.
Also, when I first started in '97, there was 21 guys in my department. There's 14, and we do way more services now than we did in '97.
And then,
I'm
yeah, so he's low. We obviously have people in the police department that we, you know, haven't been able to keep people in, particularly those part-time positions. So you take a look at when the village has been in crisis, they've typically gone to staff to make those cuts. And I think the conversation we also need to start talking about is what projects are we doing that maybe we can pause for a year just to give us an opportunity to catch up. What are things that we can, you know, push off a year? You know, we started lead services early, and that was, I think that was a great thing to do, but do we need to look at where we're at in that process so that we can still stay on track for when, you know, we're federally mandated to do it, but can we take a year off from lead service projects so that we can, you know, not have $3 million hit our budget? And of course, we've gotten really lucky. We've gotten 2 stages of our lead services. They're paid for with forgivable grants. So not saying that we shouldn't continue to try to get that, but if there comes a point in which that forgivable loan is no longer forgivable, we may have to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe just to give us a little bit of a break, we have to, you know, postpone a project. Maybe there is a green alley that we know we have to do. We have our alley schedule, but maybe we don't do it this year. And so we're going to kind of take a look at that. We obviously have the water reservoir that we'll talk a little bit more about later tonight. You know, that's a pressing project that we have to consider. And so in order to pay for that, while we have, you know, we're trying to find funding for that, but we may not get it. And so is that something that we're going to have to kind of rearrange our priorities when it comes to our infrastructure improvements? And definitely, you know, I don't know what the answer is to those yet, but I think it's something that we need to come to the realization that we may have to take a look at some of those. You know, I know there's some things that I'm going to be putting into the budget that I'm you know, we'll put pending on it. And, you know, and I'll put a little note that says maybe we just pause this for a year so that we can try to catch up on things. Cause, you know, the department heads hear it all the time, you know, from me and Tish, you know, make sure that we have money unless it's a necessity, really, especially right now. And we've told department heads when doing their budgets, you know, yes, you may have to put it in your budget, but like, there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to actually implement that. We'll have to kind of wait and see. So now that the departments have kind of shared their, you know, what they're looking for, what their needs are. I mean, as far as commissioners, do you guys have any comments, suggestions?
I do. Just one long shot, Hail Mary, but I gotta bring it up. I think on your first line item here, property taxes, that's based upon 14% of the tax bill, right? Something like that. You know, it's something I talked about a few months ago, something I've talked about maybe individually with some of the commissioners, and maybe with some of y'all, but I look at our property tax bill. I don't know how to solve that, but I know that with, I know that District 91 gets 38.5% of our tax bill. Currently, we get 14% of the tax bill. That 14% is like $6.7 million. Maybe it's hard, maybe it's difficult to chase down 10%, but that adds almost $1 million by just changing that up. And why would you do that? Well, because there's nobody in one of the schools right now. So you've got nearly 38, almost 40% of the tax bill going to a school district with that are wildly underutilized. And I know when this comes out, it looks like we don't want to give the students the money they need to be successful or for the school to run. Well, that's not what we're talking about here. At 38% of the tax bill, that is a lot more money per student than some of the most prestigious private schools get per student, quite frankly. And so let that resonate. And if there's a way, I don't know it, but if there's a way to present this conundrum to legislators or folks that could look at Forest Park and say, man, if we can allocate, maybe 28% to District 91, and that 10% goes to the Village of Forest Park, we would free up almost $1 million right there. That's real dollars of sustainable income for revenue for the Village of Forest Park. So, and maybe you could look at Proviso too. I mean, but the one that really hits home is the stuff that's right here in Forest Park, and that's 91. It's something to really, I think, warrants a good hard look at to see how we could make that happen. Personally,
Do you have any idea? I don't. What the process is to make that happen to anybody? Like who makes that decision of how the property taxes are allocated?
The clerk or the treasurer.
The assessor's office.
Yeah. Combination.
I mean, just having a
Isn't it based on
conversation.
the levies?
Well, yeah, it's based on the levy also. So a conversation could happen with
So
school
if they levy
districts.
4 times what we levy,
Right.
they're gonna get 4 times bigger slice of the pie.
Yeah, I just an understanding of the current state of affairs here that's an important conversation to have with whomever. And maybe it's easier than we think, but it's real dollars. And 10%, I think, is a conservative number.
I don't disagree. I think it's definitely something we should consider. And I'm not an advocate, it's gonna come out like, oh, they want to take money away from the kids. I had my kids go through the public schools, both elementary and high school, but I believe right now, I've looked at the report cards, I think it's $33,000 a year per kid in District 91. Which, like you said, we're talking about private school money. And a whole building that's not being used. So I'm not saying we should do it, but I think it's a discussion that we could have.
Well, if you're looking for spots to increase revenue, that's a giant one. A giant sustainable one that doesn't impact businesses. That doesn't impact the visitors and residents in town. Thanks.
I've been trying to get push our crossing guards over to the district. Not knowing, I knew they had a lot, they got a nice chunk. 50%, and then there's the back end costs involved with a higher, we've had two workman comp filings this year. And
that is so wildly ridiculous.
And,
that we're picking up 50% of that.
I've talked, some departments funded 100%. Some departments, the school district, or some municipalities, the school district does it. But it might be a way to shave some of the police department budget down. Yeah.
What is that number? 20 grand, 50 grand? I mean,
40, give or take, yeah. Not to
Save-
mention
it's not
when
gonna
you,
save the village, but-
when you have a crossing guard that's out, then you're filling it with a patrol or a parking enforcement officer.
And a lot of times on the afternoon shift, it's been a patrol officer. Afternoons or days, it's a patrol officer. So now you're taking that body, you're standing at Cedar Springs and Jackson instead of patrolling.
Staff time to do the payroll, the billing. It's a lot of extra involved in it.
One of the other things to think about is, so we have allocated money for the grant. The flood grants, so we've been allocating that. I know when I first started here, we had increased that because we had a backlog and we wanted to make sure that everybody who had applied for it had gotten it. Last year, I think we allocated $30,000 at $1,500 a grant. We have not even funded, we haven't expended all the funds this year. We have been able to pay out a grant for everybody who has actually applied this year. But I will say we do zero advertising for that grant. Everybody who comes in says to us, oh, the plumber told us about it. So I believe when the grant first started, the cost for the flood mitigation was significantly less. And so it was actually helping to fund a bigger percentage of it. Now it's not funding 50% of it anymore. It's actually, depending on what they get, easily $7,000. And people are doing it despite the grant. So that is one thing that I was going to put out there was, do we want to pause the flood grants for a year? We can make sure that up through, the end of this month that we have given everybody who has applied in this fiscal year. I do believe we still have a little bit of money left, but then do we consider pausing it for fiscal year 2026? And then we can reevaluate it again in fiscal year 27. That would be $30,000 out of the budget. Right there. And then, did consider shifting the crossing guards. There is in the contract, we do have to give them a certain amount of time. So, I don't know that we could shift the entire cost of crossing guards to District 91 out of fiscal year 26, but, theoretically in a year, that would be an additional $40,000 out of the village's budget. So right there, you've got 70 grand. So just some things to consider.
But I love the way you're thinking, right? You're on the service side. It's not staffing, it's not things, it's services, right? And so when you get into this situation, from what I could tell, and I think I even talked about it last year, maybe the year before that, it's like at some point, the level of service is not balanced out with the revenue the village gets to support it. And I think that tipping point happened years ago. But everyone expects Sal to maintain a certain level of service, to see the way that village, same thing with our first responders, right? And the way that we respond to emergencies, right? There's a level of service that's expected in Forest Park. And what I'm hearing is that we can't afford to pay for that. And so that's the real difficult conversation, right? That impacts all of us. It impacts every single resident, impacts our property values, right?
Yeah, that was part of the conversation too, when we had the meeting on leaf pickup. Leaf pickup is something that we need to do as a village in order to not, clog our own sewers, right? But if there is a way for residents to help with that, especially when they're already paying for a portion of it in their garbage fees, is that a place where residents can help the village out? Not everybody's going to be able to do that. We heard that loud and clear. And I don't think anybody here was looking to do what a neighboring community did and just completely change the program. But if there's a way that we can educate residents on how they can assist us, those people who need us to pick up their leaves, because that's the only way that they can get it done. We can still provide that service, but if we can take some of the load off, then it'll cost the village less in dumping fees. It'll be potentially less time that we will need to do that. One of the other things that we are looking at that you'll see in a presentation from Safety and Traffic is, for many years, people are looking for places to park, and they're not asking for free parking. They're just asking for places to park that are more convenient than the municipal lots, that we are limited by how many spots are in there. And they aren't necessarily close to their spaces. So one of the things that we're going to present to the council is, do you want to look at on-street parking options that, we can tack a permit fee onto? So that will be presented at a future meeting. And so that's something that we can look at and consider. And again, it won't necessarily help the whole fiscal year, but potentially it can be something we can implement in the next, 12 months. So we're continuing to look at that.
Do you still have your notes from when, because you were on a committee, Vanessa, years ago with, no, not you, with Lieutenant Weiler and a few other
I
staff
believe
members.
you gave me a folder.
Okay.
Yes, I believe
Okay.
she gave me a folder that, assuming that the council moves forward with wanting potentially the Safety and Traffic Commission to look at it and hand off to. Yeah, I probably have it in my office. as well. Anything else at the moment? Obviously, we'll have to have another budget meeting once, we have the drafts from the department heads. We will work on a draft to bring to the council, so we'll have at least probably 2 more budget meetings. The first will be for you guys to review the draft, and we can have, some more in-depth discussions, and then approve the
Will we be able to, excuse me, there was some things that were discussed that like seemed like required action that would make sense to me. I don't know, to have an answer to before we meet again, I guess. So on the police side, we talked about the vehicle lease plan, we talked about booting and an amnesty program. Finance side, we talked about places of eating, I presume, the CTA managed responses. I don't know if that's something that would get an answer to. We talked about crossing guards, $40,000, get an answer on that. Tax bill would be great. Get an answer
I think
on
the
that.
tax bill is more of a legislative thing, which usually falls on elected officials. And obviously, I mean, I can, do some research as the village administrator as well, but.
And then last 3 things were pausing flood grants, on-street parking, and leaf pickup, which I think we both visit for the most part. It's probably the same drugs. Let me know if you a bright idea on that. I'll pick up on it.
Anything else?
All right, so, staff, Rachel, thank you for tonight's discussion. Everything else is clearly. Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn this budget.
So Nero made that motion.
Adjourned to 7 p.m.
Okay, microphones are still hot. So we turn them off.